Hi, I'm Colin Seal, founder and CEO of thinkLaw, and we are looking at Lesson 5. Let's hear it for the girls. Let's hear it for the girls is part of thinkLaw's root cause analysis lessons, where we look at public policy issues and try to really push our participants to dig deep into what's really behind some of these issues that we see. Um, if you look at that lesson outline, the way that we look at this lesson is we're going to first talk about an activity that's going to help us engage in gender stereotypes and a discussion about gender stereotypes. We're going to perform a root cause analysis about this gender stereotype. We're going to apply Title IX rules. Now, Title IX is a doctrine of law that, among other things, mandates that women and men have equal access to different sports activities, particularly at the high school and collegiate levels of school. Um, and we're going to be looking at Title IX rules and how they apply to different cases, determining whether Title IX has been violated according to those cases, and come up with some of our own rules based off of our root cause analysis that might actually increase the number of women athletes. And then we'll actually take the time to evaluate how effective Congress's solution in Title IX was compared to some of the concerns that we determined were part of the root cause here. Again, we have our Common Core standards outlined here, and what's really interesting about this one is the root cause analysis that you learn in this lesson can be applied to so many other subjects and doctrines and disciplines that your students, participants are engaging in. So, very good practical tool comes out of this lesson. So to start with, a quick tip. For this lesson, I might not emphasize that this lesson is called Let's Hear It for the Girls, and here's why. When you get to this initial slide about a man and a young son who was arrested in a robbery, and the father was shot, and the son was in handcuffs, and got to the police station. Officers got to the police station. The police chief said, "Oh my goodness, that's my son." Um, there's a lot of interesting explanations that students come up with it to come up with the solution, but the actual most obvious one in this case was that the police chief is the woman. Sometimes you'll see, well, maybe this was a same-sex couple, or someone was adopted, or, separated at birth, or all sorts of kind of weird types of decisions there. Because in a lot of our minds, it's hard to think about a police chief as a woman. So that's kind of an opening to talk about the gender stereotypes. In some cases, if you have students hearing that this lesson is going to be all about let's hear it for the girls, and you kind of focus on that from the beginning, they're automatically going to see, oh, this must be a woman. So it might be best for this lesson just to put up that PowerPoint slide by itself, or just focus just on a think starter text and not what goes above it until you start getting further into the lesson. So now it actually goes pretty straightforward. We look at the fact that, back in 1971, this was the breakdown of women's participation in high school and college sports. And we come up with root cause analysis of how that might be the case. I have a sample here as to why this might be. We come up with different reasons and we kind of figure that out. And you could play this game and go through this activity with students no matter what they pick. So suppose their response is that there's less girls playing sports because, parents don't encourage girls to play sports as much as men. They do with little boys. Well, why? Why is that the case? Well, maybe parents weren't encouraged when they were younger. If, let's say, you're talking about a mom that wasn't encouraged to play sports. Well, why do you think that is? Well, maybe there's some sort of gender role or some sort of underlying issue. Long story short, once you get to that fourth why, it can look very interesting. I've seen some groups conclude that the root cause was that, when kids are very, very young, we give girls separate toys than we give boys. I've seen one class of 10th graders determine that this all goes down to the agricultural revolution, where men were expected to do a lot more physical labor and women were doing more domesticated sorts of labor. So when men were doing physical labor, it automatically transferred into them doing more sorts of things with sports. So once you come up with that why, that final why, then it becomes an interesting analysis to figure out, well, what types of things can you do to actually address that final why? What we decided to do here is actually introduce Congress's Title IX solution. And we explain what that is and the different three rules of them. And once we go through that, we look at some scenarios where Title IX is implicated. This is a great activity to have students do in groups, so they're getting that discussion going and really getting a chance to interact with each other in these. And then you can share these out once you kind of get the whole group situated. Uh, and what becomes interesting now is, you know, there's this pattern that the courts have looked to in deciding whether or not a Title IX violation has occurred. If you go back, though, to the fact that the purpose of Title IX, as we looked at in the very beginning, is to increase opportunities for girls, it becomes very interesting when we look at I Think Bigger. Because in I Think Bigger, what we explain is that a lot of schools, especially at the college level, what they decide to do sometimes, instead of, you know, creating more girls sports, if they have any sort of issues in compliance, they just cut some of the boys sports, which isn't actually increasing participation. So it becomes a really cool thing to think about, well, what can you do as a college administrator or a high school athletic director to come up with a policy that will better service the root cause that we talked about in the very beginning? How could you actually increase the number of girls instead of cutting boys' teams? So very fun to see students get into that activity. And because it involves sports with so many folks tend to play today, it's a really great engaging tool for having this discussion. That's lesson 5. Let's stay tuned for lesson 6.